They launched 6 F-22s the moment her jet appeared on radar. No transponder, no clearance, just a lone aircraft diving straight toward the carrier. Orders were clear. Surround, lock, prepare to fire. But before they could speak again, her voice cut through the comms like a blade, calm, unshaken, and followed by a call sign no one had used in over a decade. And the moment they heard it, even the lead pilot took his finger off the trigger. Welcome to those who left a trace. Before we continue, tell us in the comments what part of the world are you watching from? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit the subscribe button. They picked her up on radar at 0644 hours, slicing through the mist east of Wake Island. No transponder, no IFF, just a ghost signature charging head-on toward the Pacific Task Group at cruising altitude. Altitude rising fast, like someone had launched a Hornet from nowhere and pointed it straight at the heart of the fleet. The initial signal was flagged as a radar glitch. Thermal inversion off the water, maybe a lost bird drifting off route. But within minutes, the trace firmed up, velocity locked, no deviation, no contact, no squawk. It was flying hot, clean, and disturbingly intentional directly toward CVN 80, the USS Enterprise, the Navy's new flagship, hosting the most classified joint operations exercise in over a decade. In combat direction, Center 1, deep beneath the armored island tower of the Enterprise, voices dropped, eyes narrowed. The air was crisp with caffeine and tension. Commander Torres, lead tactical officer for the simulation, leaned over the plot table already marking intercept vectors as the CIC team confirmed. Single aircraft F/A, 18 Hornet, low visibility paint. No coalition markings, no wingman, no beacon, just raw thrust and perfect trajectory. Launch intercept, he said flatly. 6 Raptors, weapons live, clearance hold. Within 3 minutes, the F-22 screamed in the flat top of the USS Nevada, catapulted skyward under afterburner, forming a 6-point net across the eastern vector, like a closing jaw. Altitude 32,000 feet, Mach 1.5. Every radar cross-section tuned on the Rogue Hornet. For $1 billion in guided steel train on a single jet that hadn't even clicked its comms. From the CIC, Torres watched the formation form. The tactical displays painted a perfect intercept pattern. But something in his gut told him this wasn't going to be routine. Any ID yet? He called out. Negative. Came the reply from Petty Officer Kim at the communication station. No call sign, no log, no alerts from coalition air assets. We've pinged global databases. Nobody's claiming it. Torres turned to the admiral behind him. Rear Admiral Catherine Stone, a woman whose steel-gray eyes had seen more classified operations than most people had nightmares. She stood with her arms crossed, studying the tactical display with the intensity of someone calculating odds that normal people never had consider. Sir, recommend active challenge, Torres said, his voice carrying the weight of protocol and barely controlled tension. Stone nodded once, sharp and decisive. Do it up in the air. Echo lead, call sign widow, punched the encryption key and spoke with absolute calm that belied the sweat beading on her forehead. Unidentified Hornet. This is Echo 1. You are operating inside restricted naval airspace. Turn away immediately and identify yourself. Respond or you will be fired upon. Static crackled to a secure channel. Then silence that stretched like a wire about to snap. Then a voice emerged from the electromagnetic void. Calm, unrushed female, cold enough to crack glass and sharp enough to cut through 15 years of carefully maintained silence. This is Phoenix. Every Raptor in the formation stalled for a beat. Even Widow's hand eased off the trigger toggle, her muscle memory responding to something her conscious mind couldn't immediately process. Inside the USS Enterprise's CIC, the comms console lit up like a Christmas tree. Cascading alerts filling screens that hadn't seen this kind of activity since the last time the world almost ended. Pattern match confirmed, announced Specialist Martinez, her voice tight with something between disbelief and fear. Voice print returning as redacted. Origin classified, but one word glowed in the archival feed. The identifier appeared on Torres's screen, pulsing like a heartbeat. Phoenix. Torres's brow furrowed as he stared at the impossible. "Say again," he transmitted, though part of him already knew what he was going to hear. The voice returned slower this time, like it didn't care if it was believed, like it carried authority that transcended normal chains of command. "This is Phoenix, Carrier Enterprise. Confirm vector and prep my lane. You got 30 seconds before I make my own." In the silence that followed, one of the youngest officers on deck leaned toward his screen, squinting at data that shouldn't exist. "Phoenix, like the bird?" he whispered to his supervisor. But Admiral Stone wasn't smiling. Her face had gone the color of old bone. "Not the bird, sailor. That name was locked down 12 years ago." The tactical displays blinked, then froze as background systems began cross-referencing past incidents with increasing urgency. One by one, sealed entries surfaced from databases buried so deep they required clearances that most people didn't know existed. Project Nomad, Operation Blackshade, Exercise Silent Crow, all redacted, all flagged under Tier 1 blackout. Only one element repeated across them like a signature written in invisible ink. Call sign Phoenix. Status DNR. Do not re-engage. On the deck, the air boss who'd served 30 years and seen everything the Navy could throw at him whispered it like a curse word. "She's still alive." Back in the sky, Widow's HUD flickered as the Hornet came into visual range, and what she saw made her question everything she thought she knew about flying. It wasn't just flying, it was dancing. Angles sharp, trim locked. The kind of precision you don't fake. The kind of control that comes from somewhere beyond training, beyond experience. No decals, no call sign painted on the fuselage. Just a gray kill bird moving like it had something to prove, hugging the edge of sonic without breaking it. Every movement a masterclass in aerodynamic perfection. Then, just before the Raptors could lock hard targeting solutions, the Hornet banked low with impossible smoothness, skimmed under the formation like it was threading a needle, and dropped like a predator straight toward the Enterprise's deck. "Control, she's diving." Widow's voice cracked through the comm, professional composure finally showing stress fractures. Torres's voice snapped with authority and barely controlled panic. "Weapons hold. All aircraft, weapons hold." But Admiral Stone had moved to stand directly behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder with the weight of command authority. "Torres," she said quietly, but every person in CIC could hear her. "You fire on Phoenix, and we might lose more than reputation." Down below, the flight crew on the Enterprise scattered like leaves in a hurricane as the F-18 blasted past the island tower at just over 250 knots. Gear up, nose level, no warning, no salute, just perfect discipline and a hint of thunder that seemed to shake not just the deck plates, but something deeper, something in the soul of the ship itself. The deck quaked. Cameras automatically tracked the impossible flyby, and for the first time in years, the crew on CVN-80 stood completely still. Not from protocol, not from training, but from something colder and more primal. Recognition of something they thought was myth. The Hornet rose again and entered a wide, slow orbit overhead, its engine singing a song that spoke of power held in perfect check. Her voice came one last time over a secure line, carrying authority that needed no explanation. "Enterprise, I never got my landing the last time. This time I'm not asking." The Hornet circled once. Not aggressively, not hurried, but like she owned the sky, like the entire Pacific Ocean was her personal domain. As if her presence didn't require justification from anyone wearing a uniform, regardless of how many stars decorated their collar. Below, The deck crew of the USS Enterprise stood half, shielding their faces from the jet wash, watching in a mix of awe and disbelief that bordered on religious experience. This wasn't part of any drill they'd ever trained for. There had been no flight plan, no coordination, no clearance from any authority they recognized. Yet, no one moved to stop her. No missiles launched. No scramble response activated. No deck lockdown initiated. Just silence except for the dull tremor of the carrier's hull still resonating from the low pass. A vibration that seemed to awaken memories the ship itself had forgotten. Inside CIC, the air was tighter now, thick with tension that had nothing to do with standard operating procedures. Nobody sat. Even Admiral Stone had stepped closer to the main display, her command authority temporarily suspended by the weight of impossibility. Torres hovered near the secure console, staring at Phoenix's orbital pattern with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that might determine whether he lived or died. She hadn't broken formation protocols, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. She hadn't buzzed a tower or violated any specific regulation. She had simply circled once, as if waiting for permission that everyone knew she didn't need. She wants to land, Stone said softly, but with absolute certainty, as if she were reading from a script she'd memorized years ago. Torres nodded, understanding flooding through him with the cold clarity of inevitability. If she was hostile, we'd already be floating debris or buried under it. Another voice spoke up from the corner of CIC. Lieutenant Commander Ewan, Cyber Systems, a man who made his living swimming in digital oceans of classified information. Admiral, we have no registry on our bird, no tail number, no current affiliation with any branch of the military or any allied nation. She said Enterprise, Admiral Stone murmured, her voice carrying the weight of memory. She knew where to come. Or who would be here. Torres replied, and the pause that followed wasn't born from indecision, but from the recognition that some conversations couldn't be had over open channels. Some truths couldn't be spoken aloud in rooms where every word was recorded. The kind of hesitation forged when ghosts speak your name and expect an answer. Clear her for Deck 27, Stone ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just made a decision that would either save or damn them all. And someone get me a full manifest of everyone who's ever worn that call sign. I want names, dates, and every classified detail we can access in the next 10 minutes. Aye, sir. Down in Ready Room 5, just below the flight deck, tension shifted into controlled action with precision of a Swiss chronometer. Flight marshals reset the catapults with mechanical efficiency. Arresting gear crews stood by their stations, every man and woman performing their duties with the kind of focused professionalism that kept aircraft carriers operational in conditions that would break most people. Deck officers barked sharp instructions across the steel expanse, and still no one said the name aloud. Phoenix. It clung to the steel like a scent, like old blood scrubbed clean, but never quite gone, like smoke from fires that had been extinguished, but whose embers still glowed in places where darkness hid truth. The Hornet's second pass was lower, aligned with mathematical precision. Her gear dropped exactly 3 seconds before the touchdown zone. Every movement calculated to demonstrate not just competence but mastery. There was no radio call, no last-minute course correction, just precision so perfect it seemed almost supernatural. And when her tires kissed the deck with the gentleness of a prayer, the cable caught hard, halting 40,000 pounds of aircraft in less than 3 seconds flat. No one moved toward the aircraft. No one ran to assist with post-flight procedures. Not even the safety crew, who normally swarmed every aircraft the moment it stopped rolling. Only the jet itself seemed alive, hissing steam and bleeding the kind of silence that follows explosions. Then the canopy opened with a soft hydraulic sigh. The pilot who climbed out did not match the ghost stories that had circulated through naval aviation circles for 12 years. She wasn't the spectral figure some had imagined in their nightmares, nor the mythical warrior of a dozen classified legends. She was flesh and blood, flight suit zipped to the collar with military precision, Helmet tucked under her arm with casual confidence, and eyes, those piercing green eyes that seemed to scan the deck like she could still read everyone's service records just by watching how they stood. Hair pulled back tight in regulation style, revealing features that spoke of Irish ancestry and Mediterranean stubbornness. No visible rank, no squadron patch, only the unmistakable outline of a trident etched subtly on the neck of her undershirt, half exposed beneath the collar like a secret that had decided to reveal itself. A flight deck chief stepped forward, unsure whether protocol demanded a salute or an arrest warrant. She gave him a nod that didn't invite dialogue, somehow managing to convey both respect and dismissal in a single gesture, then walked straight past everyone with the confidence of someone who remembered every inch of the carrier, like 15 years of absence had been 15 minutes of temporary inconvenience. Every bulkhead she passed, every stairwell she climbed, every corridor she traversed seemed to echo under her boots with sounds that carried further than physics should have allowed. The steel itself seemed to remember her footsteps. Below deck, the rumors moved faster than she did, spreading through the ship's communications networks with the velocity of digital wildfire. Phoenix was aboard. Not a phoenix, the Phoenix. The capital letter that made all the difference between mythology and classified reality. The one who disappeared during Operation Blackshade, vanishing from all official records like she had never existed. The one who'd supposedly been buried in a sealed report after saving the entire Seventh Fleet from a miscalculated drone strike that could have started World War III. The one who refused medals, refused press coverage, refused to die when everyone expected her to. They'd said she went dark, vanished into the kind of places that appeared on no maps. Some claimed she defected to organizations that didn't officially exist. Some said she was dead, killed in an operation so classified that even the people who ordered it had their memories erased afterward. Some whispered that she worked off-grid for someone no one could name, someone whose authority superseded presidents and prime ministers. Now she was walking through the corridors of the Navy's most secure carrier, as if the passage of time had never happened, as if 12 years had been 12 seconds of temporary inconvenience. Phoenix reached the hatch to briefing room Delta, and the sight of her approaching made nearby personnel suddenly find urgent business elsewhere. No guards questioned her presence. No security systems activated to challenge her identity. She stepped inside without hesitation, and the room fell silent with the completeness of death. 12 officers were already inside, representing the highest levels of naval intelligence, special operations, and aviation command. They had been debriefing the morning's exercise, discussing classified matters that most people would never be clear to know. Now their attention snapped to the figure in the doorway, like iron filings drawn to a magnet. She didn't speak immediately. She stood there, letting them look, letting the weight of memory and myth settle over them like fog rolling in from a sea. Then she walked to the center table with the measured pace of someone who owned not just a room, but the authority to be there, reached into her flight bag, and placed a single object on the polished surface. A weathered patch, sealed trident, real metal, scratched to the edges from years of handling, authentic in every detail that mattered, unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were looking at. No one breathed. The silence stretched until it became something physical, something that pressed against eardrums and made hearts skip beats. Finally, Admiral Stone stepped forward, her command authority returning as she processed what she was seeing. "You picked quite a time to come back." Phoenix's voice was the same as over comms, controlled, cold, precise as a surgical instrument. "I didn't come back. I was never gone." Stone stared at her with the intensity of someone trying to solve an equation that might determine the fate of nations. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means you're not clear to know why I'm here," Phoenix replied, and her tone carried the kind of authority that made admirals remember they weren't the highest link in the chain of command. "Only that I need 30 minutes of flight deck time, access to encrypted airspace grid 77, and eyes off my bird until I'm airborne again." Commander Torres leaned forward from his position at the briefing table. "You're giving orders now?" She leaned forward, hands braced on the table, and when she spoke, Every person in the room understood that they were in the presence of someone who operated by rules they would never be allowed to understand. I didn't come here for nostalgia, Commander, and I didn't ask permission. Another officer leaned in. Commander Reyes, Black Ops liaison, a man whose job was to know things that kept normal people awake at night. What's in the Hornet? Phoenix's gaze shifted to him with laser focus. Classified. By who? She stared at him until he looked away. Higher than you. The temperature in the room dropped 5 degrees, and everyone felt it. Reyes sat back in his chair, recognizing the futility of pressing someone who had just demonstrated that normal interrogation techniques didn't apply. Admiral Stone exhaled slowly, the sound carrying the weight of decisions that couldn't be unmade. And if we say no, Phoenix looked directly at her, and for a moment, Stone saw something in those green eyes that made her remember why certain operations were classified beyond even her level of access. Then you'll have to explain to the Pentagon why you grounded the only pilot still cleared to finish the Crow Protocol. The silence after that wasn't confusion. It was fear. Raw. Primal fear, the kind that came from realizing you were standing in the presence of forces that operated beyond your understanding. Crow Protocol was terminated. Someone muttered from the back of the room. No, Phoenix replied without looking in that direction, her voice carrying the finality of absolute knowledge. It was paused. Admiral Stone looked like she'd just swallowed a blade, her face going pale as classified memories surfaced from places in her mind she tried to forget. You're saying the threat's real? Phoenix didn't answer directly. She simply picked up the Trident patch, tucked it back into her flight suit pocket with the care of someone handling a religious artifact, and started walking toward the hatch. Clear my path or follow my wake, she said without turning around. Either way, I launch in 20 minutes. She left without waiting for the answer, and the room stayed silent long after the door sealed behind her with the finality of a tomb closing. Outside, somewhere in the endless blue above, the F-22s still circled wide, their pilots listening to radio chatter that made less sense with each passing minute, waiting for orders that wouldn't come. They wouldn't get them because even Admiral Stone, for all her stars and clearances, knew the truth now. You don't fire on a storm you don't understand. And Phoenix was a storm. By the time the Enterprise's upper deck realigned for emergency clearance procedures, Phoenix was already back in the cockpit, strapping herself in with movements so automatic they seemed like muscle memory encoded at the genetic level. No one helped her prep the Hornet. No one dared approach close enough to offer assistance. A mechanic had approached briefly, then stopped mid-step when his eyes locked on the subtle Trident patch now visible just beneath her left shoulder. He backed off without a word, understanding instinctively that some aircraft belonged to pilots who operated by different rules. She strapped in, flicked each switch with mechanical rhythm, the kind of procedural perfection you don't forget even after vanishing for 12 years. The twin engine spun to life with a sound like controlled violence, and the blast of heat and metal behind her was the only response she allowed to the silence surrounding her aircraft. Inside CIC, Admiral Stone stood behind the radar station, watching Phoenix's aircraft icon blink from standby to active status. No one had yet dared question what Crow Protocol actually meant, though whispers were moving to the ship faster than fire, spreading rumors that would be classified and denied within hours. Torres stood by the encrypted link terminal, frantically trying to unlock old archives, the ones buried under 10 layers of black above black clearance that required authorizations he didn't have. She's operating above fleet command, he muttered, sweat beading on his forehead as he realized the implications. This isn't just black ops. This is wet work deep state level clearance. Stone didn't respond. She was staring at the navigation data Phoenix's Hornet had uploaded without asking permission, coordinates that led not toward the coast, not toward any hostile nation, but northwest into the deep Pacific corridor, into no man's airspace, the Bermuda Triangle of the West, the zone where satellites stuttered, where communications mysteriously failed, where even GPS signals got dizzy and lost their way. Back on deck, Phoenix's jet rolled forward toward the catapult with the inevitability of destiny. She didn't request catapult assist. She assumed it. She didn't ask for launch clearance. She took it. She pushed the throttle with precision that told everyone watching that she had flown dirtier missions on shorter decks, in conditions that would have killed pilots with twice her official flight hours. The Hornet roared forward and split the sea air in a single upward curve, vanishing into sky that seemed to open for her passage. Below, no one clapped. No one cheered the successful launch. Just eyes lifted in silence, following navigation lights that carried more questions than answers. Some were afraid. Some weren't sure what they felt. The only certainty was this: Phoenix hadn't come back for nostalgia, for redemption, or for recognition. She had come back to finish something that had been waiting 12 years for completion. Mid-flight, the Hornet tilted slightly, as if aligning with a vector invisible to conventional radar. Inside her HUD, a blinking triangle reactivated with systems that didn't appear in any technical manual. Operator Crow active. A secondary interface appeared beneath the throttle readout, displaying information that shouldn't have been obtainable by any earthly technology. Authorized Agent Phoenix. Her eyes didn't flinch as classified data streamed across displays that officially didn't exist. She reached under the seat, pulled out a case no wider than her forearm, unlatched it with movements that spoke of long familiarity, and revealed a device shaped like a targeting node, except sleeker, older, worn at the edges from handling by people whose names appeared in no history books. It pulsed once, recognizing her fingerprint with biometric precision that went beyond simple identification. A new stream of data appeared on her screen, coordinates and target information that made her jaw tighten with recognition. Target acquisition confirmed. Inbound threat vector. Signature. Undeclared stealth platform. Non-NATO design. Altitude, 43,000 feet. Speed, Mach 1.8. ETA, 7 minutes. She exhaled once through her nose, a sound that carried 12 years of preparation for this moment. Flipped a red switch hidden beneath the comms board, and said nothing. The Hornet tilted again, now locked onto an intercept path that would take her into airspace where the rules of physics sometimes negotiated with forces that predated human civilization. Back aboard the Enterprise, the encrypted alert system fired silently, activating protocols that most of the crew didn't know existed. CIC officers scrambled to triangulate contacts that their instruments insisted weren't there, tracking objects that move like aircraft but register like atmospheric disturbances. The stealth object didn't match any known aircraft in their databases. Not Chinese, not Russian, not anything that appeared in intelligence briefings or threat assessments. Its heat signature was faint, artificially masked by technology that suggested origins beyond conventional military development. It was flying blind toward U.S. carrier space with no transponder, no IFF, no regard for international airspace boundaries. Worse, it hadn't been detected until Phoenix's specialized equipment had painted it with targeting systems that officially didn't exist. "What is that?" Lieutenant Commander Ewan whispered, staring at sensor readings that violated everything he understood about aerial reconnaissance. No one answered, because no one in CIC had clearance high enough to access the files that might explain what they were seeing. Then Torres finally cracked one line of the Crow Protocol archive, just one classified entry that had survived decades of systematic information purging. The screen flickered, displaying a single sentence that made everyone in the room understand why some operations remained classified long after the wars that spawned them had ended. If reactivated, do not interfere. Agent Phoenix operates outside Joint Command. Objective overrides all strategic protocols. The room froze with the completeness of absolute understanding. They were witnesses to something that transcended normal military operations, something that answered to authorities they would never be cleared to know about. In the sky, Phoenix locked radar on the object with targeting systems that painted detailed profiles impossible for conventional aircraft sensors. But the object blinked back, not with missile launch or electronic warfare countermeasures, but with a data stream that flooded her displays with information that shouldn't have existed. Her screen erupted in static that wasn't mechanical interference or enemy jamming. Something more primal. something that spoke to parts of her mind that human evolution hadn't quite finished developing. The Hornet began to shake with vibrations that had no identifiable source, resonating through the airframe like the aircraft itself was afraid. HUD systems flickered and died. Radar displays collapsed into meaningless noise. She blinked hard, reaching for manual flight controls as her targeting computer struggled to process information that violated basic assumptions about how the universe worked. Another screen lit up a message that made her blood run cold. Target acknowledges identity. Engagement override pending. She hit a hard bank right, rolling into a defensive stall maneuver that brought her aircraft behind the object now visible ahead of her. What she saw defied every principle of aerodynamic design she had ever learned. Matte black surfaces curved in angles not found on any human aircraft. Not shaped like a conventional drone, not configured like anything that belonged to any military she recognized. The thing moved through air like it was swimming through liquid, its flight characteristics suggesting technology that treated gravity as a negotiable force rather than an absolute law. The air around it felt wrong, thick with electromagnetic disturbance that made her instruments lie, and her instincts scream warnings her conscious mind couldn't process. The silence from her radio was louder than any explosion, pregnant with implications that threatened to overwhelm her ability to function. Then the object tilted, banking toward her with movements that suggested intelligence behind its controls. Not artificial intelligence, but something organic, something that thought in ways human minds weren't designed to understand. Threat assessment complete. Phoenix didn't hesitate. She flipped the master arms switch, selecting weapons that appeared on no inventory lists, missiles that had been designed for targets that officially didn't exist. Her finger hovered over the trigger, targeting systems painting solutions for an engagement that would either save everything she had sworn to protect or damn her to classifications that erase people from history. But just as her finger completed its motion, the weapon's lock disappeared. Gone. Her screen went black with the completeness of death. Her hands began shaking as systems that had never failed before simply stopped working. Then, in a whisper that came not from her communication system, not from any radio frequency she recognized, a voice slipped through the electromagnetic static like smoke through cracks in reality. "We remember you, Phoenix." She jolted, her body responding to recognition that her mind couldn't immediately process. That voice, it wasn't digital, wasn't transmitted through any system she understood. It was familiar in ways that made her chest tighten with memories she had tried to bury. Old memories. Impossible memories. She dove, breaking pattern with maneuvers that pushed her aircraft to structural limits, reset altitude with climbs that burned fuel she couldn't afford to waste, looped twice in defensive spirals that would have killed lesser pilots. The object didn't follow her evasive actions. It simply hovered in space, waiting with the patience of something that had existed long before humans learned to fly. Then it vanished. Not faded from her sensors, not departed at high speed. Vanished. No sound, no trace, no evidence that it ever existed except for the memory burned into her retinas and the data still streaming across displays that were supposed to be impossible. She hovered midair, panting inside her oxygen mask, hands clenched on flight controls that suddenly felt inadequate for the forces she was trying to control. A long moment passed while she waited for something. Pursuit, attack, explanation, that never came. Then her screens rebooted with the systematic precision of military hardware returning to normal operation. New code appeared, messages that originated from sources she had hoped never to see again. Intercept successful. Protocol complete. Recording sealed. Proceed to drop point echo. She stared at the text, understanding that this wasn't victory or confirmation of mission success. It was only a statement, clinical and final, the way you might confirm a financial transaction at the end of very expensive war. Then a second message appeared, displayed in a font she recognized from communications she had received 12 years ago. Personal. Urgent. Impossible. He's alive. Her breath caught in her throat, like she'd been hit in the chest with a sledgehammer. She leaned back in her seat, closed her eyes behind her helmet visor, and whispered something so faintly that not even the aircraft's sensitive cockpit microphones could detect the words. Impossible. And below, aboard the USS Enterprise, no one knew what had just happened beyond the radar blip that had approached too close, the aircraft that had departed too suddenly, and the silence that returned heavier than before, weighted with implications that would haunt their dreams for years to come. The Hornet touched down harder than it should have, skimming the flight deck of the USS Enterprise with force that rattled more than metal. It shook something fundamental in the ship's steel soul. The moment the tailhook caught the arresting cable with mechanical precision, silence swept across the control tower like a physical presence. No cheers echoed across the deck. No chatter filled the radio frequencies. Just eyes locked on a jet that wasn't supposed to be in the sky, let alone returning to a deck it had no official clearance to land on. Phoenix never needed fanfare. She brought her own gravity. She stepped down slowly, one boot after the other, like she was feeling the weight of the ship beneath her feet, testing whether the deck would support not just her physical presence, but the implications she carried with her. The helmet stayed on for a moment longer than necessary. No salute offered, no gesture of acknowledgement toward the personnel, who had gathered to witness something they couldn't yet understand. She simply walked past the stunned deck crew, past the safety officer sprinting to intercept her, and straight into the hangar bay, her path opening before her, as if every regulation and layer of naval authority had just disintegrated at the sound of her call sign. The elevator lowered her into the belly of the ship with hydraulic precision. As the platform descended, the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. Officers whispered in corners. Marines straightened their postures without understanding why. Even the chief of the boat turned to watch her pass, but said nothing, understanding instinctively that some conversations were above his pay grade and beyond his need to know. The name stitched across her shoulder, Phoenix, seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, as if the letters themselves carried weight that bent reality around them. At Deck 4, the elevator stopped with mechanical finality. She turned, walked down the corridor with the confidence of someone who had memorized every inch of the ship's layout, and paused a sealed bulkhead marked with warnings that most personnel never got close enough to read. SIF access only. The hatch required triple authentication, biometric scanning, security codes, and clearances that existed in files most people would never be allowed to know about. But she didn't even touch the keypad. The lock mechanism disengaged before her hand reached it, responding to signals that transmitted through frequencies reserved for operations that officially never happened. A low hiss of equalizing pressure. The door slid open with the sound of secrets being revealed. Inside, a single figure waited in the cold glow of monitors that displayed information from sources that appeared on no organizational charts. Rear Admiral Jonathan Reed sat behind a desk that bore no nameplate, no indication of rank or authority beyond the weight of responsibility that seemed to press down on his shoulders like a physical burden. He hadn't aged well in the 12 years since she'd seen him last. Years of black operations and gray moral decisions had carved trenches into his face, etched lines that spoke of choices that kept normal people awake at night. But his voice, when he finally spoke, held both awe and guilt in equal measure. They told me you were dead. Phoenix removed her helmet with movements that seemed casual but carried the precision of ritual. Green eyes scanned the room, cataloging changes and constants, but not resting on him directly. You told them I was. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was radioactive, charged with implications that could destroy careers and end lives if spoken aloud in the wrong rooms. Reed stepped forward, his movements careful, like someone approaching a wild animal that might flee or attack, depending on how the conversation developed. Do you know what you just activated? I didn't activate anything, she replied with the flatness of absolute certainty. It found me. Reed swallowed hard, his throat working against words that didn't want to be spoken, and turned toward the central screen that dominated the far wall. Static clear with electronic precision, revealing a feed that originated from satellites that didn't appear on any public registry. A thermal image emerged from the digital noise. In the center of the display, A shape moved underwater, massive, slow-moving, and generating heat signatures that suggested something alive rather than mechanical. Too large to be any known submarine, too organized in its movement to be geological phenomena. The tracking code stamped across the image glowed red, like a warning, Project Siren. Reed's voice carried the weight of classified knowledge when he spoke again. We lost it 12 years ago in the Mariana Trench. Disappeared without explanation. Everyone on the retrieval operation, gone. No debris, no distress signals. Just silence that lasted until your jet hit that airspace corridor 20 minutes ago. She stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the thermal patterns that painted something impossible moving through depths where nothing should have been able to survive. It scanned me biometrically, not just visually, personally. Reed's hand trembled slightly as he tapped commands into a console that responded to authorizations most people didn't know existed. Another screen activated, displaying archive footage that carried classification stamps indicating it had never been declassified, never been shared, never been acknowledged by any official source. The image was grainy but clear enough to matter. A cockpit recording showing a young man in a flight helmet, laughing as he banked his aircraft through a canyon at speeds that pushed the boundaries of what human reflexes could handle. Reed said softly, his voice carrying the weight of 12 years of guilt. He died that day. A pause, heavy with implications. Or we thought he did, until Project Siren transmitted this. The image froze on the cockpit display. In the corner of the frame, blurred but unmistakable, stood a reflection of another pilot visible in the canopy glass. A woman with the same bone structure, the same determined jawline, the same eyes that now stared at the screen with recognition that cut deeper than any blade. Phoenix didn't blink as she processed what she was seeing. He's alive. Reed hesitated, his hands hovering over controls that could reveal information that might destroy what remained of his sanity. Or what found him still thinks he is. She turned sharply, every muscle in her body coiled with tension that spoke of decisions being made at speeds that left no room for doubt. Where? Reed stiffened, understanding that he was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. That thing is moving again, slowly, but steadily toward the fleet. Toward us. It's not following standard navigation patterns or ocean currents. It's following you. The lights flickered throughout the compartment, and deep in the ship's hull, a low tremor echoed upward through steel that had been designed to withstand anything the ocean could throw at it. Something ancient stirred in the depths, something that had been waiting with patience that predated human civilization. An alert buzzed on Reed's console, urgent red warnings cascading across displays that monitored threats from sources most people couldn't imagine. One of the fleet destroyers 5 miles out had lost communications without explanation. Then another went silent, their sophisticated electronics failing in patterns that suggested interference from sources that violated basic principles of electromagnetic theory. Screens went dark across the task force, leaving only the map display functional. A single red moved steadily toward the center of the formation, not fast but certain, like something that knew exactly where it needed to be and cared nothing for the obstacles in its path. Phoenix spoke with the calm of someone who had been preparing for this moment for 12 years, her voice carrying authority that transcended normal military hierarchies. Then we move first. Reed turned toward her, his face pale with the understanding that events were moving beyond anyone's ability to control them. We? There is no we in this. You're not even cleared to. But she was already walking past the monitors, through the sealed door, toward the catapults in the aircraft that would carry her into waters where the laws of physics negotiated with forces that predated human understanding of how the universe worked. Reed called out behind her, his voice cracking with the strain of knowledge he'd carried too long. This isn't revenge, Phoenix. Whatever this is, it doesn't want war. She stopped just long enough to speak without turning around, her words carrying finality that settled over the compartment like a burial shroud. It wants me. The flight deck was nearly empty now, cleared by emergency commands that had filtered down through chains of authority that bypassed normal protocols. Phoenix moved with the same measured calm she had always possessed, a ghost from a war no one had officially fought, re-entering a world that thought it had closed her chapter permanently. She climbed into Hornet again, carrying no additional weapons, no extra payload, just memory, training, and whatever equipment had been installed in her aircraft by people whose names appeared in no official records. As the canopy closed over her with hydraulic precision, a faint vibration pulsed through the ocean below, transmitted through water and steel to reach sensors that detected frequencies beyond normal human perception. Below the carrier, below the entire fleet, lights flickered in patterns that spoke of intelligence awakening after years of dormancy. In the sky above, clouds parted with movements too organized to be natural, pulled apart by forces that treated atmospheric pressure as a suggestion rather than a law. The F-22s scrambled without receiving direct orders, their flight leads uncertain and confused as normal communication channels filled with static that carried undertones of something that might have been music, if music could be composed by entities that thought in dimensions humans couldn't perceive. Orders remained frozen at command levels that superseded anything the pilots had trained for, but still they moved, because remaining stationary felt like accepting defeat by forces they couldn't identify. From a control tower, Reed watched through reinforced windows as Phoenix's jet rolled forward toward the catapult. She hadn't requested launch clearance from anyone whose authority he recognized, and no one had denied her permission to depart. Catapult 1 locked into position with mechanical precision. Hydraulics hissed with contained power, and then with a roar that seemed to shake the foundations of reality, she was airborne again, alone, as she had always been when it mattered most. She didn't climb toward cruising altitude. Instead, she dove straight toward the sea, descending until she flew at 200 feet above the waterline, engaging maneuvers that even the ship's advanced telemetry system struggled to interpret. A roll followed by flat inversion that placed her aircraft belly first toward the ocean, matching its movement with precision that suggested she was following navigation cues invisible to conventional instruments. The object, whatever it truly was, had become visible from the carrier's deck, a rising dome just below the surface, glowing faintly with bioluminescent patterns that pulse in rhythms too regular to be natural. It broke the water's surface gently, not with the violent emergence of submarine breaching, but with the careful grace of something surfacing out of recognition rather than necessity. And then Phoenix's communication system activated with a soft click. A voice reached her, not through radio frequencies, not through any channel her aircraft systems could identify, but directly into her helmet, as if the words were being spoken inside her own mind. "You shouldn't have come." She gripped the flight controls tighter, her knuckles white beneath her gloves, but didn't respond immediately. Her eyes flicked to instrument panels that showed all systems functioning normally. No threats locked onto her position, no radar warnings, no electronic warfare indicators. But every instinct honed by years of combat flying screamed that she was in more danger than any conventional threat assessment could measure. The voice spoke again, and this time she recognized undertones that made her chest tighten with emotions she had spent 12 years trying to suppress. "Your name was erased to protect you from us." And then, impossibly, a call sign appeared on her heads-up display. One she hadn't seen in 13 years, one that belonged to a pilot who had officially died in an operation that had never officially happened. Storm Rider. She inhaled sharply, her hand moving instinctively toward the side of her helmet before she remembered that there was no communication channel open, no frequency that could explain how she was hearing words spoken by someone who existed only in classified memories and sealed files. This wasn't a transmission in any conventional sense. This was something that transcended the normal boundaries between life and death, between possible and impossible. "Where are you?" she whispered, her voice so soft that even her aircraft-sensitive microphones couldn't detect the words. And then she saw it. The dome that had breached the ocean surface began to open, not like a mechanical hatch or submarine conning tower, but like organic tissue healing in reverse, revealing an interior that glowed with the same bioluminescent patterns that decorated its exterior surface. Inside, something emerged that defied every assumption she had made about what she might find. A figure in a pilot's flight suit, torn and scorched by experiences that had taken him far beyond the normal boundaries of human endurance. The helmet remained intact, its visor reflecting light in ways that suggested the person inside was still alive, still aware, still fundamentally human despite 12 years of existence in conditions that should have been impossible to survive. The voice spoke again, carrying warnings that came from knowledge she didn't want to understand. Do not engage. He is not yours anymore. But Phoenix was already breaking from her holding pattern, descending toward a figure that stood impossibly on the surface of something that violated every principle of naval architecture she had ever learned. The F-22s circling high above received emergency signals seconds later, red alerts indicating multiple hostiles emerging from the ocean depths, threats that didn't match any known classification system. But they didn't fire, because embedded in their targeting computers, deeper than normal operational programming, a single command overrode all others: protect Phoenix. Even the machines remembered priorities that transcended normal military protocols. Below, Phoenix's aircraft hovered at altitudes that pushed the boundaries of aerodynamic possibility. Salt spray from the churning ocean streaked her fuselage, and she opened the canopy despite flying at speeds that should have made such action suicidal, wind howling into the cockpit with the fury of forces that didn't recognize human limitations as the figure approached her wingtip, moving with careful steps across a surface that rippled like liquid metal. She whispered a name that carried 12 years of grief and hope in equal measure: Storm Rider. The helmeted figure turned toward her with movements that were slow and deliberate, and then the eyes behind the visor lit with illumination that wasn't entirely human, but remained unmistakably familiar. When he spoke, the words came without visible movement of lips, transmitted through methods that bypassed normal acoustic principles. You came back. And in that moment, everything stopped with the completeness of death and birth happening simultaneously. The ocean calmed to mirror smoothness. Radar systems across the fleet went dark, not from malfunction, but from encountering phenomena that existed outside their ability to measure. 6F. 22 Raptors circled silently overhead, not in tactical formation, but in something that resembled vigil, bearing witness to events that would never appear in official reports. The sea had stilled like a great breath being held. The clouds no longer moved through the sky, and wind fell away entirely, leaving only the sound of two hearts beating in rhythm across impossible distances. On radar screens throughout the Pacific Fleet, silence replaced the constant chatter of electronic surveillance. No hostile signatures registered, no system alerts demanded attention, just static that carried undertones of something that might have been singing, if songs could be composed by forces that predated human understanding of music. The USS Enterprise floated quietly in water that had become as smooth as polished glass, surrounded by destroyers whose crews pressed against windows and crowded onto decks, staring in breathless silence at something that challenged every assumption they had made about the nature of reality. Phoenix remained in her cockpit, canopy open to air that tasted of salt and electricity, her flight suit soaked with sea mist that carried traces of bioluminescence. Her hair, freed from its regulation constraints by wind and impossible physics, was plastered against her face, and her lips trembled, not from fear, but from a recognition of something she had mourned for 13 years. The figure on her wing hadn't moved since speaking her name. It stood there, balanced impossibly on a surface that defied conventional understanding of matter and energy, half human and half transformed by experiences that had taken him beyond the normal boundaries of existence. The flight suit he wore was torn and scorched, aged by years of exposure to conditions that shouldn't have allowed for survival. Yet he stood upright, watching her with eyes that glowed with light that had nothing to do with normal human biology. Storm Rider, her wingman, her brother in everything but blood. The pilot who had vanished on a classified mission over the Philippine Trench 13 years earlier, officially declared killed in action when his aircraft had simply disappeared from all sensors simultaneously. Unofficially, He had never been found, despite search operations that had consumed resources equivalent to small wars. The last voice transmission, classified at levels that erased people from history, had been directed to her personally. Don't come looking. Not for this. But she had searched anyway, for years, until the Navy had tried to ground her permanently, tried to silence her questions, tried to erase her access to files that might have contained answers. When official channels had closed, she had disappeared too, vanishing into the same shadows that had swallowed him. Until today. Until the coordinates that had haunted her dreams for 13 years had finally called her home. Below, on the command deck of the USS Enterprise, Rear Admiral Reed stood frozen behind reinforced windows, his hand hovering above communication controls he couldn't bring himself to activate. No one moved around him. No one spoke. Whatever was unfolding above the fleet had moved beyond the reach of normal military protocols, beyond the scope of conventional threat assessment. This was no longer about rules of engagement or tactical procedures. This was about recognition of forces that operated by principles that predated human civilization, and the understanding that some conversations couldn't be interrupted by people who lacked the clearance to comprehend what they were witnessing. Phoenix finally stood up in her cockpit, carefully balancing herself against wind that had become as gentle as a whisper, and stepped onto her aircraft wing. Her boots clanged against metal with sounds that carried farther than they should have, echoing across water that reflected not just light, but possibilities that normal physics couldn't explain. She looked at him, at what her wingman had become, at what the forces from the deep places of the world had made of him, but her voice remained steady when she spoke. What do they do to you? The figure didn't respond audibly, but she felt his answer like vibrations transmitted through her bones, words that bypassed her ears and spoke directly to parts of her mind that human evolution hadn't quite finished developing. I saw the light and followed it. I thought it was a rescue signal. It wasn't. She stepped closer, crossing the impossible distance between her wing and the surface where he stood, until they were separated by less than a meter of air that shimmered with energy patterns visible only from the corner of her vision. Are you still in there? His head tilted slightly. Not quite a nod, not quite a denial, but something in between that suggested questions she wasn't prepared to ask and answers she might not be able to accept. I remember you, he said, and the words carried weight that had nothing to do with sound waves and everything to do with connections that transcended normal human communication. That's what's left. The memory of a pilot who refused orders, who crossed lines no one else dared approach. Phoenix reached out slowly, her gloved hand extending toward his, fingertips brushing the edge of his sleeve. The contact sent electricity through her nervous system, not painful but overwhelming, carrying information that her conscious mind couldn't process, but her deeper instincts recognized as truth. Come back, she whispered. There was a sound, and not from him, not from her aircraft, but from the ocean itself. A low-frequency pulse that vibrated deep in her bones, transmitted through water and air and the steel of distant ships, carrying harmonics that spoke of intelligence vast and patient and utterly alien to human understanding. The ocean around them lit up in response, not with flame or conventional illumination, but with patterns that traced geometric shapes across the surface. Lines, curves, symbols that suggested language composed by minds that thought in dimensions humans couldn't perceive. From a USS Enterprise's control tower, Reed watched with eyes that reflected patterns etched across his retinas, patterns that would haunt his dreams for whatever remained of his life. His command team stood frozen around him, their instruments overwhelmed by phenomena that violated every assumption built into their design. The signals were rewriting themselves across every screen simultaneously, transforming radar displays and communication arrays into something that resembled art more than military technology. One officer whispered words that would be classified and denied within hours. It's not a weapon. It's a key. Back on the wing, Storm Rider moved for the first time since she had arrived. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and took her hand in fingers that felt solid and warm despite everything that logic insisted should have been impossible. For the briefest moment, she felt not just physical contact, but the return of memories that had been locked away by grief and official denial, laughter in a hangar bay, her hand resting on his shoulder as they posed in front of the aircraft they had flown together. The last time she had seen him as fully human, fully alive, fully hers to protect and be protected by. The warmth faded as quickly as it had come, replaced by something colder, but no less real. Then he spoke aloud, his words carrying across the water with clarity that defied the distance involved. It's not coming for you. It's coming through you. The sky changed color above them, not darkening with storm clouds or brightening with sunrise, but shifting into a pale, brilliant silver that seemed to absorb normal light and replace it with illumination that came from sources beyond the normal spectrum of human vision. Within that strange radiance, streaks of gold arced like magnetic field lines made visible, connecting points in space that corresponded to no earthly navigation system. The F-22s circling overhead pulled into a perfect formation around Phoenix's aircraft. Not defensive positioning, not offensive tactics, but something that resembled ceremony more than combat. Their pilots reported later, in debriefings that would be classified and sealed, that their aircraft had responded to control inputs they hadn't given, following flight paths that appeared on no charts they could access. And then Phoenix heard it clearly for the first time, a sound that rose from the ocean depths, low and growing and familiar in ways that made her chest tighten with emotions she couldn't name. Almost like music. If music could be composed by forces that predated human understanding of harmony. From the ships scattered across the Pacific, sailors stepped onto decks without receiving orders to do so. They moved as if responding to signals that bypassed normal chains of command, pilots still wearing flight gear, officers clutching radios that had gone silent, even Admiral Reed emerging from the Enterprise's superstructure to stand beneath sky that had become something other than normal atmosphere. The sound wasn't being transmitted through speakers or communication systems. It resonated from the metal of the ships themselves, from the air that surrounded them, from the water that bore them up, as if the ocean itself was remembering something it had forgotten, singing songs that had been silent since before humans learned to navigate by stars. Storm Rider turned his head slightly, and when he spoke, his words carried finality that settled over the scene like a blessing or a curse, depending on perspectives that wouldn't be fully understood for years to come. The gate is open. You can stay here and remain a legend, or follow me and find the truth. But you can't do both. Phoenix didn't respond immediately. She looked toward the horizon, where destroyers floated motionless on water that reflected possibilities instead of light. She looked toward the stars that had become visible despite the brightness of day. And then she looked back at the face behind the helmet that had once flown beside her, that had once trusted her enough to follow her into battles that officially never happened. Without speaking, she stepped off the wing. The water didn't take her. Instead, she was lifted by forces that treated gravity as a negotiable concept rather than an absolute law. A beam of energy, pale and weightless as moonlight, surrounded both of them, and together they rose from the surface of an ocean that had become something other than water. Not violently, not with the roar of rocket engines or the thunder of conventional propulsion, but in surrender to forces that operated by principles humans hadn't yet learned to understand. The F-22s peeled away from their formation one by one, like birds giving space to something greater than themselves, their pilots watching through canopies that reflected light in patterns they would spend the rest of their lives trying to forget. From the deck of the USS Enterprise, hundreds of sailors and officers stood in silent formation, bearing witness as the two figures disappeared into light that seemed to originate from inside the illumination itself. Not absorbed by brightness, but transformed into something that existed beyond normal perception. Not vanished, not dissolved, transitioned. The strange music faded gradually, leaving behind silence that carried more weight than any sound. The sky returned to conventional blue, the ocean resumed its normal behavior, and instruments throughout the Pacific Fleet rebooted with the systematic precision of technology returning to familiar operational parameters. And on radar screens across the task force, one new call sign remained, pulsing slowly in green characters that shouldn't have been possible to display. Phoenix Plus. Back in Washington, in a facility that appeared on no maps and was staffed by people whose names appeared in no directories, a file reappeared in archives buried deeper than most people knew archives could go. Project Siren, status, active, and beneath that designation, a single line was added in text that glowed briefly before encrypting itself beyond any known method of decryption. She followed him home. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in loyalty, sacrifice, and the truths buried beneath silence that officials will never acknowledge. Before you go, tell us in the comments, what did you feel when Phoenix stepped off the wing in delight that defied every law of physics she had been trained to understand? And if you believe stories like hers deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. We'll be here, bringing back the voices that never should have gone quiet, telling the stories that exist in the spaces between official reports and classified files.